three natures. Let me speak to you about what I'm calling our three natures, because no one told me what I'm going to tell you now as to where our conditioning comes from. And this self-awareness campaign I'm on is to empower you to flourish, to realize that you were born hijacked, and you need to take your life back from the hijackers and take your life off autopilot and fly your life manually. It's exhausting for a while until you realize you can do it long term. Our three natures. Now, these three natures, the first one is what's called the biogenic nature, or fixed traits. That is, the traits you were born with, your biogenic, your biology, the biogenic nature. Secondly, the sociogenic nature, or your nurture, or learned traits that you were taught in your childhood, from your parents and your background and your culture. And thirdly, ideogenic nature, or what I would call your chosen free traits. Your biogenic fixed traits are, as I said earlier, the imprint on your life that you were born with. Your cellular, neural, biological, imprinted traits, the way you were born, no reference to you. You didn't permit anything, agree to anything. It happened to you before and during your birth. You were born with the biogenic programming already embedded in your humanity. You need to know about that and know the good and bad of it as to whether or not parts of that are still troubling you. Now you're 56. You're not 6, so you couldn't have figured it out then. Maybe you're 56 or 86 or 96 like me. But you're figuring out, I've got stuff on board I don't recall choosing, I don't recall agreeing to, and I think it's creating this default mechanism in my humanity that drags me back to a place I don't want to be. I don't know what it is, because it's so embedded in your genetics, your physiology, your biology, because it is your biogenic nature. The sociogenic nature is how you were raised in your nurture. Now, our personality, let me say a little bit about personality. Our personality is largely shaped by our nature and our nurture. So you've got to know that your personality that you have now at this stage of life largely wasn't chosen by you. It was chosen by your nature and your nurture. And now you're the kind of personality that you are. And so if you're born in Japan to a Japanese family, then there is something going to affect your biogenics and sociogenics just because you are Japanese born in Japan. However, if you're Japanese born in Los Angeles, you still have Japanese biogenics, and you'll have some Japanese sociogenics, but your Japanese nurture is also going to be infiltrated with Western ideas of culture. So Japanese people may not be as Japanese as they are in America as they are in Japan. Same with Indonesians and British. And wherever we are in the world, we are also dealing with the incoming, surrounding osmosis effect of the culture we are in. So, and this is a big issue around the world, by the way, corporates, because many corporates are struggling with the massive cultural cross-pollination. Because you've got American bosses in charge of Japanese staff, and there's a massive cultural clash. And no one spotted the problem. They just think it's a personality clash. But it is a biogenic, sociogenic clash that's going on, and it's costing corporates a lot of money and a lot of fallouts, a lot of resignations of people leaving companies that could have stayed there if people were more open to this idea that the world is changing, we're more spread out than ever, so all of this is getting more mixed up than ever, and fascinating about its effects on all of us. And I travel more than ever now that I've done to watch these nuances all around the world. So whether you are raised in your sociogenic nature, whether you are raised open, conscientious, agreeable, stable, responsible, or you're raised more neurotic, irresponsible, disagreeable, all of this happens upstream of where you are now. And it is imprinting itself on you and creating this personality that is working for you or working against you. Personality is a term that describes your personal traits, your consistent patterns of behavior. To be born in the East is to be born into a part of the world where you are automatically imprinted biogenically, sociogenically, with a more holistic approach to life, with a more corporate, family, group identity than in the West. Much of the Eastern identity was established by Confucius. Much of the Western identity was established in Greece centuries ago by people like Plato and Socrates. What the idea of Greek nature and Greek identity has spread in the Western world is massive doses of individualistic, egocentric narcissism. Whereas in the East, and I've studied this recently, it's fascinating, if you watch people from the East take a selfie, it's normally a few people on the picture. This has happened to me, happened to friends of mine, it's happened to me and others. I've even been walking past a random group of Chinese people in America who asked me to be on their selfie. But if you see a selfie of a Westerner, it's moi, and only moi. Some interesting research of the difference between a Japanese person, Chinese person, looking into an aquarium full of fish, and an American or a European looking into an aquarium full of fish, then asking them both afterwards, what did you notice after 5 minutes staring at the tank? The Westerners say, we just saw the big beautiful fish that came to the front of the glass and just showed off, did its thing. The Eastern mind, the Eastern sociogenic, biogenic wiring made them see everything else in the tank. So they could see the other fish, the background, the planting, the little toy things in there to keep the fish entertained. They saw the fish at the front, but they saw multiple other fish too. So even the neural circuitry, by being born in the East, means that you even see more group and see more holistically than the narrow, individualistic, narcissistic, I only see this, and the blinkeredness of the Western culture. And narcissism gets more and more out of control the further west you go from Greece. It's called California. And no one told us that for centuries we have been born into these preconditioned, set ways of being. And so that's why I was interested in, for the purposes of understanding what happens to our soul, what happened to it, what happened to this core identity that we have, is that life and nature and nurture begins to paint these layers on us and labeling an ego. I've come to believe that the soul is the personality's mothership. So the greater the alignment with our soul, the greater your personality will be. Because love and kindness and compassion come from your soul, not from your personality and not from your ego. So the greater your personality is being lived out of your soul, your core self, the more beautiful your personality will be. But the more your personality is rooted in your external labeled ego identity, the worse your personality and how my personality will become. Because the soul is not limited or living to the 5 sense realm that we live so much in. So the sociogenic becomes the learned traits, the things you learn as you are raised by your family, the mold they pour for you, and their parents poured for them, and their grandparents poured for their parents. We are raised generationally in this sociogenic nurture. And the 5-8 years of your life are where this nurture gets embedded in your psyche, in your neural wiring, in your personality, in your ego. In the first few years of your life, this nurture gets deeply embedded. And we learn, this is the problem with nurture. We learn, and this is good and bad, by the way, but I'm thinking more of the negative effect on us as humans. Because I meet more of that around the world than good versions of this. Because I don't think autopilot default lends itself to good outcomes. Is that what happens is that parents who themselves never ever figured this out now start to have children. And because they didn't unlearn, unlearning is a superpower. The reason often we don't unlearn is because we love and respect too much those that taught us it. If you really love someone that taught you something that clearly was wrong, maybe good at the time, but it clearly was wrong, to let go of it, you feel you're betraying that person. So unlearning becomes awkward when the unlearning involves, but I love my mom. I love my dad. I love my teacher. I love my pastor. I love those friends. If it's someone that you cherished, but what they taught you was not helpful, we tend to cling to it too long. So what happens is that generationally, we keep passing on all these flawed ideas of humanity. So the parents carry on with the kids, and the kids have kids, and on it goes. Because no one is stopping to unlearn, and a lot of today, as you can tell, is about unlearning what we have been taught and no one questioned. Learned traits get reinforced, therefore, by our fixed traits. Learned traits reinforce. So if you are a Muslim or a Christian in a non-Muslim or non-Christian country, the chances are the parents are going to more reinforce those values to protect our religious identity than if we were in a Muslim country or a Christian country, more sympathetic. And as I said, if you are an Indonesian family but you're living in Europe, or an English family living in India, or vice versa, the chances are you will even overdo the need to enforce fixed traits. So we enforce the learning to make sure you know we're Indian, we're Indonesian, we're British, we're Christian, we're Muslim, we're Buddhist, we're whatever, we are this or that. So when you feel your fixed traits are threatened, the learned traits even get more enforced and stamped on us. And we've got people doing that who are unconscious. They don't know they're enforcing a learned trait that someone should have helped them to get free from. And it's getting passed on generationally in that way I mentioned. So we have a massive identity imprint through these layers of nature and nurture. And the nature and the nurture create a fixed, rigged, bias narrative for your life. Our nature and nurture create a narrative in your life that very often, more often than not, is rigged for failure. And that narrative becomes you, whether it is you or not. Thirdly, ideogenics, this third nature. I'm excited to leave you with this idea because this is my favorite of all these three. Ideogenics, free, chosen traits. Now, the word ideo is where we get the word idiot from. Or idiosyncrasies. The word ideo comes from Greek. And it means, ideo in Greek simply means personal or particular to oneself. So ideo, an idiot, was never a negative, unkind thing to say to someone in its original use of the word. If you were an idiot, an idios, as the Greek would have called it, an idios, the word idios, I-D-I-O-S, idios, that became idiot, was first used in 14th century Greek culture. And it meant that you are different, special. You are different enough to be considered odd. We'd now call it weird. I have 8 grandchildren and 2 of them are weird. Odd. They are idios. They are idiots in the best sense of this original meaning of the word. Now this is the one that really matters, this ideogenics, because let me frame it this way. If biogenics, sociogenics, ideogenics were musical genres, musical categories, then biogenics would be classical music. Ancient tunes that have been programming your family line for generations. Let's call it classical music. Your biogenics, musical genre, classical. Your sociogenics is the family playlist. See what I mean? It's what your family have been playing and dancing to and living to for generations. But your ideogenics is jazz. Here's where you get to improvise yourself away from your fixed and learned traits. Your ideogenics, your being you, enables you to improvise yourself away from your biogenics and sociogenics, away from your ego, away from your false sense of self, away from your rigged personality, away from your internal narrative. Your biogenics, your ability to jazz yourself away from, to play yourself a new tune, to start a whole new language for your life, to start a whole new identity through your generation, is what you get to do, what all humans get to do. We get to choose our identity. We get to step away from what people told us. You can't step away from that. And I say that to say this to you: being you is the most courageous thing you'll ever do. Now you know why. Now you know why it's the most courageous thing you'll ever do, because of how difficult it is to do it and how unpopular you will be, even with your family, if you do it. If you say to your parents and grandparents, I'm sorry, I don't want to do that for a living. I want to do something else. I'm sorry, I don't think that way anymore. I do not believe that about people. It will not make you popular to the people that gave you your fixed and learned traits. But you get to jazz, improvise yourself away from all that conditioning. And so you stop. And this is why this seminar matters so much to me, and the Edge of Human Flourishing, because you get to stop being a victim of your nature and your nurture. And you get to be a jazz player all of your life. Be a human improvisation genius. And improvise yourself away from all this default dragging you back to who you don't want to be, versions of you. Because when you improvise yourself away from autopilot, your soul wakes up and says, yay, We get to be us for a change. Keep going. Keep saying no. Keep refusing that labeling. Keep stepping away from that default to ego and the worst parts of our humanity. Your soul starts to emerge. Now you start to be kinder and more self-aware and more inclusive and less threatened by people that are different to you and less judgmental and more gracious and kinder. All of that is in your soul. It is who you essentially are as a human being, but we stop living from it from birth. And you got to jazz yourself away from it. I love jazz. I love jazz. To watch jazz players improvise now. You won't know they're improvising because it all sounds like they're reading music. Some of you are into jazz. To watch jazz people and a jazz ensemble improvise, it is like magic. It's just off script. Nobody knows what's going on, including each other. But there's a synchronicity between them. There's an intrinsic, native, instinctual connection between them because they've learned to improvise themselves away from a script and not know the outcome. You're not going to know the outcome. Don't think because you don't know the outcome of your jazz means you shouldn't improvise yourself towards it. Because we need more humans about which we don't know the outcome. We don't want your life like a cookie cutter. That's you. This will be you in 20 years. This will be you in 40 years. We want you to jazz yourself away from all of that pre-programmed robot version of you. All right.